Welcome back. We hope you found some comfort in the information presented in the program, When Families Grieve. Coping with the loss of someone close to us is one of the most difficult things we have to go through. It's painful and hurtful, and although healing does take place, it happens gradually. How you grieve depends on several factors: your personality, how well you cope in difficult situations, your age, your life experiences, and your faith. Now we'd like to hear from you. What comments or questions do you have about this topic? Our phone lines are open, and you can call into our studios now at 1-800-298-5298. And we're joined tonight by BethCole, Dean of the College of Nursing at Brigham Young University. Dean Cole, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And of course, for sharing your expertise with us and with our audience as well. The first question for me is, how is it that we deal with an issue like grieving in the College of Nursing? I don't think I would have thought about that being a tenet of nursing.
Well, if you think of it, nurses are usually attendant at most of the births and generally at all the deaths in the hospital and even in hospice in your homes. So it's very common for nurses, and we teach a lot about it in the curriculum as we prepare nurses for practice.
Now, you mentioned, nurses are usually at the bedside. They're kind of that hands-on. There is different loss when we talk about death and grieving. There's sudden loss. Maybe somebody has died in a car accident versus a lingering illness, like someone dealing with cancer or whatever it may be. We still are suffering loss, but that affects us differently, right?
It does, and again, it will affect us depending upon our own personalities. But at least sometimes in the lingering illnesses, you get a chance to say goodbye. The sudden and unexpected deaths are very traumatic, and you can't even say the last time we talked with a person, it was always happy. I mean, sometimes, you go out the door and you've had an argument.
You don't realize that that was the last time you had.
Absolutely.
So when you talk about that different type of grieving, do you find that people are struggling with their own emotions in the sense of what I should have been able to do?
So many should-haves, would-haves, and people hit themselves over the head terribly about what if I had done this, what if I had done that, what if I just delayed them from going out the door, what if I had not asked them to go to the store.
They almost take responsibility over what happened, thinking I could have changed the events.
And you just really have to work very hard at saying, I can't go back. I can't change it. And I can't hit myself over the head because of it either.
And you have a term for it. It's called survivor guilt.
Oh, yes. That's very, very common. And it's very sad, but it is the way our minds work. It's all the what ifs. What if I had done this or not done that? Or how come me? How come I'm alive and the other person isn't? And people.
How do you answer that? Because that is complicated. If it's not at all a surprise that there is a sense of guilt for being able to be alive and not being able to prohibit or stop someone else's death, how do you address that and say, okay, you're feeling this, but here's what you do with these emotions?
Well, I think you try to help people to get perspective. You try to help them understand that that the world doesn't work like a robot, or that life isn't just like a textbook. It doesn't just go from one piece to the other, that life has many unexpected elements in it. We can't always tell what's going to happen next, and we can't always be responsible for everything that happens. We are responsible for some things, but we can't be responsible for everything. So you can't assume responsibility for an accident that happened on the street or something like that. And those are the ones I think that have caused a lot of people sadness and grief
because our nature is to want to control the things that are happening in our life.
Oh,
and realize that we don't have control over everything is part of that process. We've mentioned that throughout the night you can call in and bring us your questions and your comments as well. We have Lisa in Clearfield. Lisa, thank you so much for calling. What's your question?
My dad died about 2 months ago, and I'm having a hard time coping with his death and just getting through and not being so sad with my mom and just trying to get through. I know he's in a better place, but it's just really hard for me to let go and to remember the memories of him.
And Lisa, our heart goes out to you. We understand exactly what it feels like to lose a loved one. When she says, I have a hard time letting go, should she be letting go? Or walk us through that.
Well, that's a term that we use for trying to deal with their loss, trying the separation from them. Sometimes letting go isn't exactly what we do because we do keep them with us, but they're not with us physically, but we do keep them in our heart. 2 months is, be very kind to yourself. 2 months is not very long. And so, and it's very hard when you're grieving and you want to talk about it, and the other person, like your mother, is also grieving, so that, you know, you just have to try and talk about it in ways that work for you, maybe short bursts of time, and allowing people to have the full range of emotions. Sometimes you're mad about it, sometimes you feel badly and sad, and sometimes you're remembering the good times. So there are lots of different kinds of feelings that happen during that time, but sadness is probably the most pervasive because we miss them so.
So it's absolutely human and normal to be 2 months after the loss of a family member, to be feeling like I'm having a hard time going through that. What other activities might Lisa do to help her channel those emotions and remember her father in a way that makes her feel like she's processing that and healing in a healthy way?
Well, two things. One would be talking about it and finding someone who can listen and hear your side of it. Maybe a good friend, maybe another family member, but sometimes that doesn't work. But the memory, there's so many wonderful things you can do that help you remember the person in a positive way. Anything from scrapbooks to creating memory boxes to getting people to write letters in and tell you stories. You can find out wonderful things about the person who has passed away just by asking someone to write you letters. Remember, you know, memories
especially
of
as Father's Day is coming up in Lisa's situation, that would give you something to work towards, to say, I want to also have that day to honor him, and let's gather those memories and thoughts together. And I hear from you too when you said your mother may be grieving differently, because we all grieve differently. We have another caller on too. Kay is in Salt Lake City, and Kay, thank you so much for calling us, and welcome to Ask 11. What's your question tonight?
How long does grief last? I lost my mom about 8 years ago, but I'm still grieving as if I lost her yesterday. And mostly around these holidays, it's even harder. It just seems like I'm not ever getting over the loss of her.
Well, there's no formula, and part of it getting over is you hope it is less intense. And it sounded like, especially around holidays, that is a difficult time, and that is very true. Holidays bring out the whole idea of families. We're usually with our families on holidays, and so that's oftentimes when we do miss them. Some of the ways that you can handle that difficult time is to plan out what you're going to do that day. Don't plan like it's not going to happen and you're not going to think about them, but plan something. Say, I'm going to, if it's in the summertime, you can plan a plant or buy something and give it to somebody. If it's Christmas time, you can buy an ornament that makes you think of them.
Or Mother's Day is coming up, obviously her loss of her mother.
That's
so
a very hard one.
You're trying to say, okay, I want to honor those feelings and channel it somewhere.
Yes, yes, absolutely, and finding some way to make it positive. Set an extra place setting at the table and pretend like they're there, and or do a variety of different things that might work.
Well, and I want to go back to is that Kay was saying it's been 8 years, and is there a timeline? And so how would you address that and say, okay, let's talk about the length of time, because 8 years is a long time.
Yes.
Everyone has their own timeline, but how do you know whether you are healthily grieving?
Well, if you can function every day, and if you can go about your activities, if you can engage with other people without having, without some problems, I think then you know that you're at least coping with it functionally. But the idea of losing your mother, once you've lost your mother, you've lost your mother. And it's not like you're going to create another person to take their place. But hopefully there are other people in your lives that you can invest in and that will invest in you and make it so that the world is worth living and you're enjoying the activities of existence. But at the same time, it's very hard. And 8 years is a long time, but it doesn't, but it's like, it probably comes in waves. when you miss your mother around a certain time of year. Around maybe it's your daughter that's getting married or your something, and you miss your mother because she was there for you and you wish she was there for the granddaughter. So that usually comes in waves.
Well, and as Lisa and Kay have called us, I mean, they're both feeling the emotion of losing someone. So let's talk about what happens when we suppress those emotions, because I honor the fact that they would call and say, my heart aches. So is there danger in those of us who say, you know what, it's better just to suck it up and move on? I mean, let's talk about expression and repression when it comes to grief.
You have to be careful that we don't say there's a right way and a wrong way, because everybody does do it differently. But if someone is never talked about it or never, you know, you do hear some cases where people will say once they're dead and they move everything out of the house that reminds them of them and just like put it on a shelf and don't deal with it. That's not realistic. They were a part of your life, and they probably influenced you in many ways if they were a close family member. So not to deal with it at all is kind of like ignoring the obvious. It's kind of like pretending it didn't happen. Well, it did happen, and you ought to be able to deal with it. But some people have to move on. For example, women who've lost a husband, or husbands have lost a wife, they just have to keep going. And to keep going, they just kind of do put it on a shelf because they could not keep going if they thought about it much. But that should only last for a period of time, and then they ought to be able to weave it back in their lives, the memory of the person, validating their existence, that they were here, and validating their love and their caring about that person.
What about validating someone else's grief? Because we may have a family member or a friend who's dealing with the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's a husband or a wife. How do we best support them in that grieving process? What if we do feel like, oh, I'm worried about them, I'm not sure that they are going through this okay? How do we as a support help them in that?
I think we listen. That's the hardest part. Sometimes people want to talk about it over and over again, and that's okay, because they were woven so much into our being that they want to talk about it. And it may sound like the same story to us each time, but it's not. So talking about it is probably the best. Assessing whether or not it is interfering with their life and they're moving on, so that they might need further counseling and might need to
in
be
terms
seen.
of the stages, sorry for stepping on you right there. As far as the stages of grief, there are similar steps or phases that we would each go through when we lose someone, or?
Well, there was a theory about, maybe 20 years ago, Kubler-Ross, who talked about stages, and I think essentially what she identified were some very important parts of grieving, but we don't go through stages. Probably there's
so it's not like it's a plan that you're running through.
But some people want to know, am I getting better? And so they'd like to know that at this point, oh, I'm halfway through, or gee, I'm almost through, or boy, do I have a long way to go. But it just doesn't really work that way. It does work better if you think about it more as like waves crashing in.
All right.
That it just,
well, because you've had such a traumatic event.
Yeah.
So one of the first stages would be, I guess, shock. That initial. What else? What other waves?
well, that one's probably the most pronounced at the beginning. You feel like you're in a fog, you're in a dream world. I think on the show they talked a little bit about it can't be real, and you kind of are in that stunned point of life. And I think that's very functional. That helps us get through the funeral, that helps us get through the next day. But after that, then you kind of have to reframe what your world is, especially if it's a spouse or a child or a parent. It's like, how do you make sense of the world with that loss?
Because it's changed.
It changes. It changes what you do day to day. Your spouse, if you've lost your spouse, it changes everything from maybe what you ate for dinner to how you sleep at night, to
how you perceive yourself rather than as a couple,
Absolutely.
as a single individual. What about the strong emotions, the phases of those, depression or anger?
Again, different personalities will have different strong emotions in different rates. People are often very surprised that they get angry. They're mad at the person who left. Well, isn't that, and we think that that's a very strange emotion, but it's not. It's so common. It's kind of like you're that that ripping away, and you're mad about it. It hurts. It's painful. So why, why not anger? Anger is a very reasonable response. The other one that people often miss is confusion. I'm not sure if they were putting some of these up or not, but confusion, forgetting things. It's like you're in a fog and you forget appointments. You may forget something you learned yesterday and now it's the next day. And so you try to teach people, don't start a new job, don't try to do too many new things that take a lot of energy because
the mind's on overload.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of not able to process everything, and it's taking care of the most simple steps. What about that sense of isolation and loneliness? Is that one of the phases as well?
It is. Well, I think the loneliness, and again, we often have a lot of people around us, but we're still lonely inside because we miss the person. I worry mostly about the elderly people who lose a spouse. They've lived with them for 55 years, and all of a sudden their whole world changes. And they talk about it, the loneliness as being the most profound emotion that they have, and how they're longing for their missed partner.
They literally are. They're mourning not just the death and the life, but the loss of that person that's been by their side, and it's so understandable. Thank you so much for explaining so much of this with us.
Thank you.